life centered on her love of letter writing, reading books, and nature. The wonders of nature thrilled her senses of touch and smell, and books brought the world to her. Through reading, Helen's insatiable curiosity soon awakened to great questions about God and religion.
Why does the great Father in heaven think it is best for us to have pain sometimes? What is spirit? Where is heaven? Who made God? What is soul?
Young Helen's search for answers led her to a profound and revealing observation, one that combined both her spiritual quest and her avid literary pursuits.
If I can write what my soul thinks, then it will be visible, and the words will be its body.
As Helen's interest in spiritual questions continued, she had an unexpected and life-changing experience.
Helen had an experience when she was around 12 years old. She was sitting in her library at home, quietly reading a history book, and suddenly she had what she perceived to be an out-of-body experience. She felt as though her soul had been in Athens. In that moment, she realized that in the sense of touch, she had found an eye, and that her soul was independent of time and place.
The bright, amazing realization seemed to catch my mind and set it ablaze. Space was nothing to spirit. I perceived the realness of my soul and its sheer independence of all conditions of place and body. It was clear to me that it was because I was a spirit that I had so vividly seen and felt a place thousands of miles away. In that new consciousness shone the presence of God, himself a spirit everywhere at once, the Creator dwelling in all the universe simultaneously.
This extraordinary experience inspired in Helen a quest that ignited her mind. It generated even more spiritual questions, many of which centered on her bewildering thoughts about the Bible. Was God loving or wrathful? What and who is God?
Many of the stories in the Bible seemed like Greek and Roman myths, scarcely a reflection of the being whose face shone so benign, beautiful, and radiant in my heart.
Helen began experiencing a crisis of faith. Where was the God she felt in her heart? Did he really exist? What she would come to see as divine providence intervened when, at age 13, Alexander Graham Bell introduced her to John Hitz, a former consul general for Switzerland. Hitz had lost much of his hearing, and he now distributed information about the deaf via Bell's magazine, Volta Review. Like her earlier benefactor, Mr. Jungi, Mr. Hitz was devoted to the philosophy of Emanuel Swedenborg.
John Hitz met Helen Keller when Helen was 13 years old. John Hitz became her spiritual mentor. She called him my Pflegevater, which in German is foster father. She actually called him the foster father of her soul.
In answer to Helen's ongoing spiritual questions, Hitz gave her a Braille copy of Emanuel Swedenborg's book, Heaven and Hell. This revolutionary work of visionary theology was something of a runaway bestseller in 19th century America. Indeed, Henry Ward Beecher, a popular preacher of the day, said nobody was educated who had not read Swedenborg. Just as Helen Keller's life changed for the first time when she awakened to words, so after reading Heaven and Hell, her life changed for a second time. She now awakened to spirit. Helen's whole inner being resonated with Swedenborg's words.
I never again doubted that there is a spiritual body within my own imperfect one, and within a few dark years, the eyes within my eyes would open to a world infinitely more wonderful, complete, and satisfying than this. I let myself go and tried to puzzle out the long words and weighty thoughts of the Swedish seer.
Emanuel Swedenborg was an eminent 18th century Swedish scientist, statesman, philosopher, and inventor. Suddenly, at the age of 57, he had a spiritual awakening, and for the next 27 years, he meticulously recorded his experiences of heightened consciousness and visions of the afterlife. Over time, Swedenborg's spiritual writings accumulated into a comprehensive body of theological work, on a wide range of spiritual subjects, including what happens after death, spirits and angels, the true nature of love, God and Scripture, heaven and hell, and the meaning and purpose of life.
He wrote and published extensive documentation of his experiences of the afterlife, including his most popular title, Heaven and Hell. He found that in the other life there were indeed angels and devils, but they were not a separately created race of genderless beings. They were just people like you and I who had passed on into the afterlife.
Swedenborg's visionary journeys showed him a heaven that was multidimensional and open to people of all religions.
Swedenborg described a heaven that was open to all people in every faith tradition, as long as they lived according to the good tenets of their faith, which was to love one another. This was an ecumenical heaven whose God was an all-inclusive God that transcended every religious sect and welcomed all into his loving arms.
All through Swedenborg's books shines an image of the eternal love which embraces every human being.
Swedenborg's description of a loving God and an afterlife where no one would suffer from disabilities gave Helen great hope. She also found his writings on heaven and living a loving and useful life profoundly inspiring.
Swedenborg had the repeated experience of seeing friends and acquaintances of his after they had passed on, and he saw that some went to hell and some went to heaven. He observed that those who went to hell were people who were primarily self-involved and not caring of others. And he saw that those who went to heaven were people who had devoted their lives to useful service, to being of benefit to others. Swedenborg also found that joys and pleasures that we selfishly hold on to actually evaporate over time. But joy and pleasure that we share and wish on others grows and strengthens. These two concepts of usefulness and the sharing of joy were vital to Helen Keller. Their imprint is visible in the whole way that she conducted her life.
According to Swedenborg, heaven is a kingdom of uses where endless interests await us. We go to heaven every time we think a noble thought, and we stay there when it has become our happiness to serve others.
In addition to Helen Keller, many remarkable people the world over found inspiration in the spiritual writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, including Goethe, Balzac, Dostoevsky, Yeats, Blake, Emerson, and the Zen master D.T. Suzuki, who dubbed him the Buddha of the North. For Helen, John Hitz acted as a mentor and conduit to Emanuel Swedenborg, spirituality, and philosophy. He became the pivotal living influence in her spiritual life.
From the moment of their first meeting, Helen